Welcome, everyone. Let's get started so we have the most time with our amazing guests today. This panel is brought to you by a partnership between the Eleanor Roosevelt Center and the incredible student activist network SEAT. My name is Sara Boettiger. Eleanor Roosevelt is my great-grandmother, and I'm really delighted that the Eleanor Roosevelt Center has taken on the issue of book banning. My great-grandmother felt that intellectual freedom was both a universal human right as well as a cornerstone of democracy. It was so important to her. And having her voice in today's environment, I think, is super important. She was also really well known for her insistence on going out and listening to people's voices everywhere, all around the country. She wanted to hear people's experiences and right from their mouths, and that's what today's panel will give us. She really listened with her heart to the issues. So that's what I'm going to look forward to today, is listening with my heart, and I will hand it over to Cameron.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our program. It's a pleasure to have you here. I am the executive director of Students Engaged in Advancing Texas, known as SEAT. We are a movement of young people in Texas, where book bans and book challenges are one of the worst in the nation. And as a student and leading this great movement of young people across Texas, fighting book bans, defending our rights as students, we have built this peer mentor network where we are developing transferable skills and demonstrating youth visibility in policymaking. We deserve a seat at the table in the decisions that directly affect us and our futures. And our future is worth fighting for. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kasey Meehan, the program director of the Freedom to Read project at PEN America, and will be our moderator for this evening.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I'm thrilled to be here and really am just excited to be in conversation with such an esteemed group of panelists. So Cameron will be joining us on panel tonight with Becky Calzada. Becky is the district library coordinator from Leander, Texas, co-founder of Texas Freedom, I put Texas Freedom Tree, which is our another group, Freedom Fighters, the co-founder of Freedom Fighters in Texas, is an author themselves, as well as the AASL current sitting president. Thank you so much, Becky, for joining us. And then we're also here with Ocean Vuong, who likely needs no major introduction to those tuning in tonight, but I'll give it anyway. Ocean is the author of On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous, poet, writer, professor, and photographer. And we're really excited to have you here with us tonight as well, Ocean. Thank you for joining. And then, of course, Cameron will be back on our panel. So just before we launch into the conversation, I wanted to give a little bit of context in the way of some of PEN America's recent research on the state of book banning. So over the last 3 years, PEN America, along with many other organizations, have recorded a crisis that is the book banning movement. Just over the last 3 school years, our data wraps up in the 2023-2024 school year, we've recorded over 16,000 instances of book bans. We know these book bans are part of a very well-resourced, well-coordinated effort to remove certain stories, histories, experiences, and identities from public schools, as well as in public libraries. But what's important and what I think we all want to speak about tonight is that for every book ban, there is a growing resistance movement as well. There's growing opposition to these restrictions on our freedom to read. And this movement looks like parents, educators, students, librarians, and authors getting, as coordinated and as loud in defense and protection of our free expression as, the other side. So really excited to kind of dig deep on that topic tonight. We know activism can be both rewarding and challenging. And tonight we're going to hear a little bit more about the hidden costs associated with defending the right to read. So with that, I'd like to bring all the panelists up on our Zoom screen. And I want to start by asking each panelist to share their unique vantage point as advocates and activists Could you share a little bit about, who you are and how you have gotten involved in this area of advocacy? Maybe we want to start with Ocean. You were
My name is Ocean. I've always, as a teacher, I teach a class called hybrid text, and in that we teach Walt Whitman, Rimbaud, William Carlos Williams, who's known as this kind of pediatrician, wholesome American poet. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater. Guess what? He was banned, right? His first book, banned at the customs, had it printed in London, spring and all, shipped to the States, and he never got it. It was banned, at the height of the Red Scare, World War I. And so I think and of course, that class goes right up to Allen Ginsberg, which is probably the most famous obscenity trial in America in 1955, nearly 100 years after Whitman. And so this is common, unfortunately, in our species. The endeavor of writers is also the endeavor of fighting for a voice against censorship. And so it was very serendipitous that while teaching last spring about all these banned books, and it wasn't around banned books, it was around innovation, difference, difficulty, right? Hybridization is weirdness, right? Breaking borders, troubling borders. But it wasn't it wasn't a coincidence then that those kinds of books were also books that have been historically banned. And then at the end of that semester, I had an update. My class was like, "Professor, I think you're getting banned in Texas." And I said, I had a moment where I was like, "Oh, wow, this is a teaching moment that is very rare, but also very troubling that, Marx says history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. And it's hard, not to see the ludicrousness of it, that we have not learned anything from either sides. Either, on one side, banning doesn't work. It makes books stronger. The subversive power of them draws attention to them. And historically, people bootleg books, they hide books all over the world. This is still happening. And the human desire to know prevails against all book bans, and then, on our, on the side of those who gets banned, usually it just means that you're touching a nerve in the culture, and some kind of fragility is being exposed, and so if you can survive that, because sometimes bans leads to violence, it could lead to book burning, as we've seen, and so the troubling factor there is that it could lead to escalation, but if we could survive that, we can weather that storm historically. We arrive, I think, at a stronger place, and discussions about this and strategies to move beyond it will make better readers, better reading culture, but also a significant new crop of writers that I think are much more interesting and stronger.
Thank you for that. Becky, tell us a little about your experience. Yeah.
Becky Calzada. I am born and raised in Texas, and all product of public education. And I have been an educator. This is my 38th year. And I've been involved as a librarian with advocacy work since I started in my library career, which was now we're year 28. And of course, a lot about just, what the work of librarians and the importance of them and what librarians can bring to a school program. But all of that kind of led to where I am today in terms of advocacy, because of early on in 2021, we had a lot of mis and disinformation being shared about what librarians were doing. All the bad things, pushing pornography, explicit books, agendas, and credentials being attacked and that sort of thing too. And it was, and then we also had even legislators like Matt Krause, who sent a list of books to every school district in the state of Texas, asking them to remove things around topics like Black Lives Matter, you know, a database around health, and I mean, all kinds of topics, LGBTQ, reproductive health. I mean, just all the topics that at that you really, you know, nobody could explain where the list came from other than they were very targeted topics, and works of fiction. So anyway, we just got really frustrated and kind of launched that Twitter hashtag takeover on Twitter when it was what it was. Basically asking everyone to share what a book that made a difference in their lives, because as librarians, you know, we witness this every day. And I think the most glorious thing and the most important thing is that I think about myself as a reader. I didn't see myself in a book till I was 28 years old, and it was in a book called Too Many Tamales. And I saw myself in South Texas making tamales, you know, but I was 28 years old. I'm not 28 anymore, but obviously I just think about the strides that publishing has made, the diverse authors that are around that are sharing books on topics with authentic characters that are experiencing problems in the world, that help young people, young adults, readers really generally navigate through problems, and using the character as a way to have conversation if you're at home with your family, just trying to navigate life and even just trying to learn. And so, you know, obviously, you know, seeing that takeover kind of showed my colleague and Carolyn and I that, you know, there was a need, because at the time there was nobody really doing any kind of advocacy, and we were really essentially like that first grassroots advocacy to try to explain to our legislators, books are important and you're taking these away. And so now we go around speaking, but we do now have like PEN America and Unite Against Book Bans and National Coalition Against Censorship. So right now we're mostly just connecting people to resources, because many don't understand how to have those conversations. They don't know what to say, and helping people to know how to navigate that, how to write an op-ed, how to write a letter to your school board, even just talking to your principal and saying, access is important, following policies is important, and that sort of thing. So, so yeah, and so I'm just very grateful to be here to share with y'all.
Cameron, yeah.
So when I was 4 years old, my family moved to Katy, Texas, which is outside of Houston. And we moved because of the school district. It was a destination school district. My family wanted me to have a good education. And so we came for the schools. And I have always loved reading since I learned at a young age. And libraries were always my favorite place in the community and at my school. I love browsing small bookstores, especially with my mother. And these were places that made me feel welcome, where school, in many cases, had not. As a queer student in Texas, one who visibly has Tourette syndrome, is disabled, on the spectrum, just finding myself in books was how I could grow, how I could find a space that comforted me. And it wasn't many books that I could really find myself. I could find comfort in reading, but to really find myself was really challenging. And it wasn't until when I finally started seeing myself in affirming literature, LGBTQ literature, and authors and stories and narratives, at that point in time, that was when these books were being pulled off of shelves. My school district, Katy ISD, was one of the leading districts banning books in the greater Houston area, especially. Being a role model, not a very good one, but being a role model for pulling books off of shelves, canceling author visits. These certain few in the community were taking advantage of fear and bigotry to advance what they considered was parental rights, but was denying the rights of students and families all across the district, of which we have 96,000 students now in our district. This is a massive school district, and to see that just because of one complaint filed by one person and the political pressure that was happening at school board meetings, that now I, as a student, and all of my peers, we were being sent a clear message that our educational system did not care about us. They cared about education, they cared about students, but did they really care about us as those students? And feeling lost at that moment in time, feeling that, well, we do have people around. I see that my classmates and my peers, well, not all of them, but there were a good number of them who were passionate about reading, who were passionate about civil rights, and knew that this book banning in our district was not right, and we had to do something about it. But it took a lot to actually go before our school board, the people who hold that power before us as young people at 17 years old. How are we going to go before our school board in such a public way about this? And so it was something that we knew needed to happen, but it turned out to actually just be me. When we decided that we were going to step up, when Jerry Craft's graphic novels were removed, when his author visit was canceled because certain few people thought that he was promoting critical race theory as if it was even something that was bad, as if this was fear mongering that could give them the fuel and the power to take over our school board. And that's exactly what they did. At this meeting in November 2021, my senior year of high school, I signed up to speak and walked into my school board meeting that Monday night. I had homework. I was working on college applications even, just a lot going on as a 17-year-old. And I was the only student in that room. But these decisions were affecting me. And yet they were all the other people in the room were there to speak on how more books needed to be pulled off shelves. And so when I was called after a series of speakers spewing hate from the lectern, making me feel unwelcome, I went before the board and called to light this censorship. And not a single person applauded like they had for all the previous speakers, roaring applause for everyone. But for me, it was just silence and stares, walking back to my seat, having no friends there, having no other people there that actually supported this, just silence and chills. And I knew at that moment that maybe I was alone. I was isolated in that space with no one around to support. But little did I know that, like I like to say often, is that those stairs that they gave me were stairs to climb on. And so in the coming hours, I received text messages from friends, and people were posting online about the meeting. And there were news reporters coming to me at the meeting wanting to speak with me. And in that time, I knew that I was not alone, that we had momentum. And so we got together. Those same students who wanted to be involved but didn't feel like they could be publicly realized that, oh, well, if you're doing this, then maybe I can join with you. And we built a movement. And I, as the book nerd, introverted since day one, I wasn't this elaborate public speaker. I read from a script on my phone. It's very basic of what I could have done, but I decided to go before my school board and do that. But to see that there was trust in our movement as students, the fact that we could actually build something from that, get national attention on our district in the press, build relationships with policymakings, and to then get donations from publishers and nonprofits to distribute hundreds of banned books across the district and across Texas. And then to leading seat. Just this all happened because we saw that we were actually not alone, that there were so many people in our community and across the nation who wanted to support, but each of us felt alone. And so it was me kind of sort of being thrown into this as someone who was affected by these policies, but then working collaboratively and collectively and knowing that a movement relies on people and relies on our stories. And we did it all together.
Thank you, Cameron. And I love that phrase, the stairs to climb on. That's a good one. I appreciate you offering that. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I forgot to give everybody listening the format for this conversation. So we'll have we'll have discussion with the panelists for about another 20-ish minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&As. If you have a question for Ocean, Becky, Cameron, please put it into the chat, and then we'll make sure to spend about 20 minutes towards the end with those questions from attendees. So I wanted to, I think I really appreciate the title for this webinar around the hidden costs, and I want to head there next. So on a more personal level, which we thank you in advance for kind of sharing and opening up in this way, let's explore these hidden costs of activism. What do you all find as most challenging to navigate when facing opposition or threats related to your advocacy work, related to, whether it's book bans or, defense of free expression more broadly? We could start from the top again, maybe, and start with Ocean.
Well, to me as an educator, the cost is immediate. I'm lucky to teach at NYU, a state that doesn't have these threats, but my students come from all over the world. And, education, particularly literacy and the literacy around literature, which is critical thinking, questioning, discussion, dialogue, happens at the earliest level possible, right? Elementary school, middle school, high school. And to realize that, these movements at such foundational levels of reading and thinking are kind of cutting off my future students, right? They might not get to me. They might not be inspired by the texts, again, historically banned and censored texts that we teach that will bring forth the next generation of literary makers in this country. They might be gone even before I know who they are. And I think there's so much in the writing world about making it, right? So many writers don't make it, et cetera, et cetera. We have an even larger grief here, is that they might not even get to ask that question, if I make it or not, because they don't have that kind of inspiring work. And so much of this conversation is around, we need to remove propaganda. The curriculum is forcing students to, move towards this kind of communist movements. And all that is absolutely not true, right? If anything, you're depriving the students of a diversity of options, which is, by the way, what Stalin did, right? It was called socialist realism. And, most writers, you don't remember a lot of writers who come out of that movement because it was just serving the state. It was writing by decree. And so if you take, representation and actions that are different outside of the literary lexicon, you're depriving the reading public and writers of that possibility of making real historic change in as artists. And that's already done. It's sad that we don't, in a way, it's good that we're having this discussion, but you don't have to have an argument about, where we should be, because historically these debates have already happened. The experiments of book banning and censorship has already happened and are still happening, and there has never been a fruitful inaction of these regimes. And so much of what we struggle, I think, as educators, as writers, is amnesia. Even the motto, right? Make America Great Again. Like this comes out of amnesia, because when you ask, well, where exactly is this again? Where can the memory place us into a timeline where we can have a fruitful discussion about what is greatness, what is time? The conversation starts to collapse, it starts to fall apart. And so I think so much of where we're struggling with, and so much of what education is about, is working against amnesia towards thoroughness. And that can only happen with research and engagement. And I think on a more existential, and I'll stop here because I don't want to go into a professor lecture. Unfortunately, I have the tendency to think in unending paragraphs, much to the regret of my family. But you know, if you get into this conversation where the West particularly is obsessed with greatness as a decree, as a monolithic value, and the fear is that if you teach something, it's instantly great and celebrated. And I think I would want to push against that, particularly in literature and the arts. And I think so much of our education has happened that way, right? And all of us, if not, some of us, not all of us, have taken classes where it's great Victorian writers of the 1890s, the best American novels of the post-war era, right? So you have this curation of education as this Mount Rushmore of literature, where in reality, we should borrow from the scholars, right? We study the Holocaust not to celebrate it, to know it, to understand it as an artifact, and then engage with it, and then hopefully prevent it. And so in likewise, there's this knee-jerk reaction that anything that is taught is instantly celebrated. And I say this as an author, like I don't want my book to be taught dogmatically as this is an example of great American literature. I would prefer this as this is an example of important American literature. What are the important conversations that it brings forth? What are its failures? What are its aspirations? Now we have a place, a site where students from all backgrounds can engage in something with significance rather than greatness. So I think this response to ban comes from a miseducation of American pedagogy, in that we have been so comfortable with presenting everything as greatness. And even regardless of the sides of the aisle that you're on, greatness is a fallacy. And what's really at stake here is knowledge and understanding.
I would be okay with listening to you talk some more. I'm just like, I agree. And I think about, from what you shared, as a human being, life can't be perfect all the time. And when I think about that, or when I just think about my life in general, there are ebbs and flows in our lifetimes, and it's in the valleys of where we're struggling, where there is maybe sadness or grief or loss, is that when I am back in that point of happiness, that I can appreciate and that time, but also learn from those dips, right? And so I hear you speaking of the same thing with history in terms of censorship and all. And when I think about this question and the hidden costs, I mean, yes, I take some hits personally in terms of like being targeted on online or social media. And the only thing that helps me through that is, one, that I have friends that support me, or family that say these people don't know what they're talking about. But even beyond that, I also know that there aren't a lot of people giving them that kind of attention. But along that note, when I think about other librarians who maybe are being targeted or being shared or doxxed and online, that don't have that kind of support system, I know we are seeing librarians not either leave the profession because they can't deal with this, or they're not being treated as professionals. We also are not seeing many people going into the profession, which is a problem. So there are hidden costs. And I think, we also think about some professional librarians not feeling like they can speak out, which is terrible, because they're directly being attacked or being questioned, but yet they are afraid of losing their jobs, or that sort of thing too. So I think the other last thing that I find that's really challenging about my work is the lack of understanding about what censorship is. Oftentimes we hear, oh, that book is not banned, you can go buy it wherever, at a bookstore. And there's this lack of recognition to, first of all, the fact that we're assuming that all people have funds to be able to purchase books, but that secondly too, that that even assuming that somebody can even just get online and has internet access, because there's so many in Texas, so many rural areas that don't have access or aren't even close to a library, whether it's a school library or public library. And so there's also a lot of misinformation about kinds of censorship. You know, when I think about there's of course, removal, you know, just getting rid of a book, but people don't realize that when you draw pictures over like the butt of no David, that you're redacting, or that you're maybe moving things, like maybe you're requiring parent permission in a library. And then of course there's the biggest thing too, the self-censorship that's happening, because school librarians are feeling like, I don't want to buy this book because maybe it's going to be challenged, or I don't know if people are going to approve of that. So there's so many hidden impacts that we see, and so many that we don't even know are documented because there's no way to capture that. So
Thank you so much, Ocean and Becky. And I feel like at this moment we're in right now, I mean, there's no sugarcoating what we're going through. We are in the middle of history, and we have been tasked with authoring it. I mean, we've been here before, time and time again. And if there's anything that I've learned, censorship erases our histories and limits what's possible. That's the message that censorship is sending to our youth. And these book bans and censorship as a whole has never been about this conversation over appropriateness in classrooms, but rather they've been attempts to legislate people out of existence. And it's not just history and limiting what's possible, but it's our everyday realities. And that's why we have to make a commitment to the freedom to read. If we're going to turn the page on censorship, it's not going to happen with us just being complacent and trusting the system, but rather doing something that's going to engage the people that we're not engaging, and committing to making that a daily habit to protect public information, to protect the histories of marginalized people, and to limit suppression, to confront censorship. So everyone has a voice and has a seat at the table in the history that we are in right now. It's our history right now, and we should have the ownership of it.
Thank you, Cameron. No, I think, well, as I imagine we all share this, but there's different ways in which the emotional toll affects us as, like, you know, kind of frontline folks, as students and librarians and educators, as authors who are being told, you know, your work is being censored in a given school district. And I'm interested in, like, how are you all navigating kind of that emotional toll with protecting you know, your own peace and your own sanity and your own creative process, and, you know, holding on to that stamina to keep doing the work. How do you find that balance?
Well, I think it's tough. And it's in a way humiliating. You know, you write a book to speak, right? That's the difference between a book and a diary. Regardless of how the sentences work, you write, you make these decisions to publish, to communicate with your species. It's the oldest art. It starts with the campfire before the page. It starts even before papyrus and ink. It's storytelling. And so you imagine that nothing could be more innocuous than sharing, you know, the DNA of a selfhood with others. And I'm so gullible, you know, and naive in many ways that I'd never even imagined it could happen in my time, even though I know historically it's there. And so it was a shock, you know, to me. And but I think I personally, you know, my family has been through so much as immigrants. And I've seen them labor and lose and break their bodies in the factories and the nail salons. And to me, that price is so heavy that I don't know. I can't imagine what that price feels like. But I do know that I get to write and work because that bill has been paid, right? And so for me, it's like it's like getting to a restaurant, you eat a 5-course meal, and then the waiter says, by the way, this has already been paid in full by your family. Wouldn't you eat every single thing, right? And so for me, the fight, the work is that meal. That fight is the gift. It's made possible, right? It's a privilege to struggle. And it's a privilege to struggle for what you believe in. Some people don't get that privilege. Some people don't, either they're in places where it's impossible, or they're in predicaments where they have to labor away that time. And so we get to do this. And I commend, Cameron and Becky are so inspiring to me, because as an author, it would make sense. It's a reactionary gesture for me to go out and defend my book's right to exist. But y'all are doing it, y'all are defending something much more noble to me, which is just reading itself, right? And the cost of that, like at the end of the day, I get to go back and be an author, but a librarian or a student putting their neck out is putting, they don't have anything to fall back on. They don't have a writing career or a publishing house, right? Even Penguin Random House, for their benefit, is putting out lawsuits to defend the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech, to protect their own books, of course, but also correcting this injustice that's happening in a country where historically this was supposedly the beacon where freedom of expression could be done, and that for much of that is still true. I must say that, I don't know if I would be the author that I am if I was not an American author. There are many friends and colleagues I have who cannot write the things I write in their home countries. And we should look to that as a lesson rather than follow that route, right? Because on the ultra conservative side, the rhetoric has always been America is the last hope. It's the rare beacon. And I say to them, yes, please acknowledge that in the diversity of reading and freedom of expression, because it is rare. And the cost of silencing is tremendous, and it's happening right now. So my position is that there's always a tougher struggle than this, and to have the capacity, right, and to have Cameron and Becky speaking so eloquently with so much experience, that's a gift to me. The battle is there's a kind of pleasure. It's a great cost as well, but there is a joy in knowing that I can fight, I can do this, when so many of us who we don't even account for do not have that ability.
Thank you, Ocean. I am very fortunate to work in a school district that supports access and follows policies. I think for me, being able to share the stories of those librarians that maybe can't speak out is one of the things that I want to do, and I carry that with me because I know not everyone has that privilege that I have, but I also recognize too that it could change in a flip. It just takes an election and that could change, right? So that said, in terms of trying to protect myself, it's sometimes learning when to say no and have balance, because I do have a full-time job. But I also make time to just in terms of the mental health piece of it all, to just turn things off, go outside, because I do want to write. I write down, I get ideas when I talk to people. I think about things and that I want to write about, and record those kinds of things in a diary, because I know that we're living in a very, what will be known as a very historical time. We've had, just like Ocean said, we've experienced censorship over time. And I think back to the start of our country, and our forefathers starting a library and talk and early conversations about the restriction of books, and someone saying, no, we were escaping that. That's why we started this country. We want to have libraries and that sort of thing too. So it's those sort of, core fundamental freedoms about around intellectual freedom. And then just kind of sitting there thinking about reminding myself that I was raised on libraries. You know, my parents came from two different countries and with an 8th grade education, and worked so hard to put me through school. And so hard work is not something I'm not, afraid of. But I also think too is I just know what libraries did for my life, and I want to be able to protect those kinds of freedoms for others. And so that is what drives me and helps me to continue this work.
Cameron, we're going to come to you in a second, but I just wanted to share for all the attendees. After Cameron's response, we're going to move to an open Q&A. So if you have any questions for Ocean, Becky, or Cameron, please put them in the chat and we'll curate a few of those for our open Q&A time. But Cameron, yeah, please.
Thank you so much. And it makes me so warm to be in community with everyone here, knowing that censorship isn't going away, but we have each other right now. As advocates, particularly as student advocates, we are standing up for those who can't speak for themselves, but we also have to be doing it for ourselves. That's how we are sustainable. That's how we grow. That's how we make impact as a social movement, but also nurture ourselves and our own souls, or we're not going to be able to be those leaders. I mean, being a leader doesn't just mean creating new followers, but creating new leaders and being a role model, being a source of hope and inspiration. It means building community and having one another in a space where we have shared values and a common goal, because we are in this for the long game. This is not going to be over in just a few months or in a few years. We are in this, just like how we've been in this for decades and centuries. Book banning is not new. And as we look back, we've seen that we've made so much progress in the last few years or decades or centuries. We've made progress, but we of course still have a lot going ahead. And right now it can feel really challenging, of course. It can be daunting, especially to be a student in today's America. And sometimes we may feel like the efforts that we're doing, we're giving it our all, but still somehow we're seeing that we are losing. And that's in some way, I mean, there's validity to that. We are going to lose. That's going to happen. We're going to go through hardship, but also we are going to win. We're going to make great wins. And just looking back at the past 2 years or 3 years in Texas, during this time of book banning, we've seen that book bans in Texas have declined in the past few years, according to PEN America data. We've seen that we're cultivating cultural shifts in our communities. Katy ISD was pulling books off shelves, and community members responded by establishing the first ever Katy Pride, which has had 2 festivals and is going to have another one this coming year that we look forward to. And seeing that these efforts by communities, these are collective. This is something that is not just about policy transformation and challenging censorship in that tangible way, which is really important, but we also have to look at how we're going to make wins amid these losses by cultivating compassion and these cultural shifts. We have to build community so we know that we have one another, that we are going to be able to shape a future together, because we can't do it alone.
Here. You're right. As always, Cameron. I get the pleasure of hearing from Cameron, a good amount in our spaces, and every time, like, just taking notes. Thank you. All right, let's open it up to questions. I know we have a few students from Texas, I believe, that are on with us tonight that have a few questions to kick us off. And then there's a few that are coming in via chat that we'll see if we have time to get to. So is Grace joining us? Or okay, is this Sumya?
Samya.
Okay, great.
So I'm a student in Conroe ISD, where On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous was banned. I guess one of my biggest questions is kind of just what message do you think is important to reach students in Texas, which is potentially a cause for the book getting banned?
Can you repeat your question around what message? Can you be more?
Yeah.
Yeah,
what message like would you like students to get from the book that like also potentially could have been a reason that the book was banned?
I see. You know, strangely enough, I am an author wherein I can never say to a reader, oh, you got that wrong. I meant this thing, you misread me. I think linguistically, that is not even possible with language, right? Because just take the word winter, for example. One definition in the dictionary, but every single one of us have a different connotation of winter, depending on where you are, where you live, your memories, your life, whether you're Zimbabwe, Brussels, Texas, or New England. So linguistically, it is impossible to have an ultimate meaning to anything. So I have always been an author who feels that any engagement with a book is still true. It might be different from my intention, but it doesn't mean what you've read and what you've taken from the book is not true. And so to me, it is the ultimate democratic space that someone could read a book and have any emotion, positive, negative, neutral, ambivalent, and it is still valid. And I think any enterprise that robs a reader of that experience is, quite frankly, unpatriotic according to the values of this country, for what it's worth. And so to me, that's I don't have a dogmatic relationship to meaning, but for all students and all readers, particularly students wherein my books might be difficult to get to, I hope I would say that whatever they see in it is valid, and I want that for them. As an author, my only hope is that someone reads the book and gets more of themselves, because that's what reading is a special art, in that it does not, the book is not complete when I finish it. Whereas a film is complete when it's done. There's the time, there's the shots. Sculpture is complete. The sculpture doesn't add or grow, right? As far as I know. Painting, same thing. Even drama. You watch a play, it's all played out, everyone sees the same thing. But the book is just text, right? If I hold up a book, this is just text. It's only literature once it's read. And that happens in each individual's mind, right? And so the great power of literature is that it can never be wrong. When I say sunset, all of us has a very specific image of it. And how can I say your sunset is wrong and my sunset is correct, right? We make alongside the author. And so to deprive students the possibility of making what they want, making meaning, right? Making scenes in their heads, right? There's many theories around reading. And one of the ones that I'm interested in is this theory that we actually borrow from our lives to map onto the things we read. So when someone says gas station, he walked into a gas station. We borrow gas stations in our lives, and then we collapse them into a simulation, and then we let characters move. And so to deny any student the possibility to build their own world based on the blueprint of the author is a fundamental violence to the endeavor of education itself. So that's what I hope for any student, is just more of themselves, reveal more of themselves to themselves. And that is, quite frankly, the most rewarding aspect of any reading.
Kasey, can I add something to what Ocean said? Because I love
Of course.
Samia's question. Samia, so in our school district, we had quite a few books removed from our curriculum units for language arts. And just like the students in Katy, we had some students that did not like the fact that they didn't have a voice at the table, so they formed a banned book club. And they took the books that were told that they could not read, because we had a list on our website, and decided to read each one of them as a group. And so I think it was a group of like 15 that read, and they, even though they didn't have access to the books, they leveraged their social media reach. And so many authors just pitched in, $10, here's the book, got the 15 books, they read the books, and then they would take each of these books and share the reason that the committee removed them, but then they shared what their takeaways were, because like Ocean says, every reader has a different takeaway. They apply. It's just unique to the individual. And what was so beautiful was that then they would share these with the administration and request that it be put back along with a seat at the table, because they wanted to be a part of these processes that they weren't. And now students in our school district can, because they advocated for that opportunity. And so never underestimate what you can do is my takeaway from this too, because I know it took a while and the students were impatient, but before they graduated high school, I was actually able to say, we're going to be inviting secondary students to our reconsideration committees should a problem or a question come up, which I think is wonderful for student agency too. So
That's wonderful. Thank you for that, Becky. Grace, we'll turn it to you.
Yeah, so I have a question for Ocean and then a question directed kind of to everyone. So the first question is, has the experience of being banned changed the way you write or view your current projects? And then my question to everyone is, what do you think authors should learn from book bans?
For me, the answer is no. I, like many immigrants, many refugees, I never was told as a child that I could be an author. An author to me was as surreal as a unicorn. And quite frankly, I had this wild idea that they were all preordained by the government. Because, they ask you want to be a police officer, a nurse, a doctor, but no one ever said, and even if they said you can be an author, no elementary teacher knew the steps to do that, right? Because there are none. Most of my students with an MFA end up working in coffee shops, right? And then they have to fight and meander their way. It's a very circumnavigating life. And so to me, the cost of arriving on the page is not even arrival. One survives onto the page at tremendous prices. And so to me, there's no ban in the world that would alter how I write. Because to me, the work gets done when my desire to speak outpaces my terror of living. And some days one beats out the other, but it's always this kind of twin, energy. And so to me, it maybe it's too early to say. I just finished a novel, and I had no effect on me, but it has effect on. No, for me, the creative writing space is like a cave. I go into a cave. I forget a lot of things, including book bans. I forget family members. I forget friends. I forget to eat. But it changes how I think as a citizen, as a teacher. I have a tremendous amount of respect for librarians and students and advocates and activists who do the work that my nervous system doesn't always have the capacity to do. And it does make me think through the great paradoxes of this country, right? Because all of the things that it purports to value, it actually at times in various instances, destroys, right? And silences. And I think that reality brings me closer to my fellow Americans, right? I'm not running for office, I swear to God. But it brings me closest to this idea that we are in this aporia. We are a country of contradictions, and it will never be smooth. It will never be easy. It will never be clear. But that is what literature affords us: complexity through dialogue, right? Which is also why my attendance policy is very strict. Because unlike, calculus, hey, give me the right answers, you're good to go. In an English class, you need to be here. We need each other. We are all we have in a class that is discussion based. I need you to bring your discomfort, bring your bewilderment, bring your joy, and then we need you and your thinking to make it possible. So it actually, it reminds me that at the end of all this, if we can have more of this, even with folks who want our books gone, if we can have more of this, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm just young, 35, and just thinking it's all possible, right? Which is at times the trouble of youth. But maybe it's what's needed, right? I have this deep faith, if you want to call it that, that it's very hard to hate people when you talk to them for a long time. It's very hard. It becomes an upskill effort to truly hate someone after being with them, being in company with them, and discussing with them. We actually have a lot of shared ideals. And so if book banning can get us the capacity to look at each other and discuss and talk through our difficulties, it can only make us stronger. And it is a requirement for both literature, but any country in this experiment of America.
Thank you for that, Ocean. I'm going to move to our final question, but I just wanted to flag that we'll put a few resources. I saw some questions come in around like how can we support librarians and looking for additional data on where book banning is happening. So PEN America's resources will head in the chat. Please follow Becky and Freedom Fighters. Please follow Seat and Cameron. I love Seat's newsletter. I don't know how often do you send it? Bi-weekly. It's filled with so many important calls to action for the state of Texas and nationwide. So follow your panelists and you'll find lots of resources based on what we have here. So I think this tags a little bit onto Grace, your question for all panelists, but just as we wrap up, we'd just love to hear about what's motivating you all. What's giving you hope and keeping you, organizing in this current movement. Maybe we'll start with either Becky or Cameron. Yeah.
I'll start.
Yeah.
So what gives me hope, first of all, are the young people. Like I think about our band book club. They started as sophomores. They are now in college. And I have just, really kind of stepped back in awe. They've invited me to their meetings and just watched them advocate for access and for books and just for an opportunity to be a part of the conversation. I think that's amazing. And I think that especially because I remember when I was that age, I was not doing those things. I was just, going to band and, just being a kid, which I think that's also kind of not a bad thing. It's just that there wasn't a need for that sort of thing that, we're also seeing our young adults having to do these kinds of actions. But I also just see them just enacting a lot of change already, which is just a beautiful thing to watch. And then the other thing that gives me hope are the lawsuits that we are seeing that are, unfortunately, we have to watch, bad laws happen in order for there to be litigation, but the litigation is actually passing in the courts. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And then I think finally, the last thing is the authors. I see, even through these very trying times, I've seen authors weave in censorship through their stories, whether it's a middle grade novel or a young adult novel, and they're taking this moment and weaving it into their works of fiction to build understanding with our young people, helping them understand what it is, what they can do, and that sort of thing. So yeah, that gives me a lot of hope because there's a whole new generation that's going to understand what this is all about.
Cameron.
For me, I could talk on and on, but to keep my responses succinct, I find hope in both reading banned books and advocating alongside incredible student leaders like Samia and Grace. Just it being an everyday community building exercise to find hope and strength in one another and to recommit ourselves to whatever the day or the week's challenges are going to be. And politics is ever evolving, and somehow our freedom to read has inherently been a political issue over time. But knowing that we as students are standing up on the front lines, we are saying no to when we are being told no. We are remaining firm and steadfast in our commitment to the freedom to read, to our rights, because we have imagination for the future. We aren't limited by the status quo that's not helping us. There's an unjust status quo that we're seeking to advance. That's what we're doing. And to do this alongside each other and to make our voices heard has been incredible. We are the experts of our experiences, and as the world is built on stories, with books and our advocacy is taking us forward. And it's been a pleasure to be on this panel with everyone here. And this is one of those beams of hope.
Thank you for that, Cameron. Ocean, any closing thoughts around hope?
I'll echo both of you, and then particularly Becky, because Gen Z gets a lot of flack, and as a teacher of Gen Z, right, my students are all Gen Z, I must say, like, I have never seen a more politically conscious generation in my life, and historically, I don't think there has been one since, as active and as engaged and as aware and as proactive since the American Civil War. And I think, the amount of possibility, right? Because it's, I would say, even more so than the students of the 60s and 70s, because that was, in many ways, most of those movements, diffracted into aesthetics, right? Hippie movements, and it became style and stylized. But here, like, my students' ability to really come forward and say, we can do it now, right? Really different from my millennial generation, which I think came out of, the recession, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, 9/11, and the opioid crisis. And so we were kind of bereft, and we had this kind of complacent kind of, I'm glad to be here attitude, right? I'm glad to have a job. I'm glad to just put my head down and go to work, and thank goodness, right? Because our future was so bleak. But we didn't have the internet to make everything, vivacious and vibrant and active now. We didn't have a place to express our anger and our rage. And whereas now my students can do that, and then, hundreds and thousands of people who are feeling the same thing can immediately respond. And so this generation collaborating and using the internet for themselves, there's a lot of truth to be said about how these social media and the internet has destroying our mental health, and that's valid. But my students have taught me how to fight for myself, how to advocate for myself, how to draw boundaries, and how to kind of make demands, right? They said, Professor, you have a dean, go to your dean with your demands. I said, who's my dean? They're like, they would tell me who they are, and I share this with a lot of my colleagues, and we're constantly stunned. And so the hope is not, and I want to be clear, it's not like, oh, you guys go and do it. They have taught me how to do it, right? This discussion has taught me how to do it. They have taught me that nothing is off the hook. And that has been the greatest gift to me. And so I'm proud to fight alongside them. They've let us in to their movements, and they're teaching us how to fight for ourselves. And that has been such a revelation to me as a teacher and just as a person.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I was reflecting on you shared earlier, like we make alongside the author, and I was picking up on like the same sort of sentiment that we can, we make in this movement alongside each other. And I, certainly agree that we are expertly guided by the folks of Samya and Grace and Cameron. So thank you, and Seat. So thank you all for being here so much tonight. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Ocean. Thank you to Seat for hosting, and the Eleanor Roosevelt Center for hosting this panel. And thanks to all of those near and far who took, time out of their day or evening to join us in this conversation tonight. So again, thank you. Thank you. Have a fantastic night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.